Welcome to Keys to the Future, the podcast that explores the stories, insights, and ideas that inspire the next generation of STEM professionals. I'm your host, Gabby Coe. Today, we're tackling a big question. How do you stay relevant as technology evolves? Technology isn't slowing down, and neither can we. So I've gathered a panel of professionals to share their strategies, insights, and advice on staying ahead of the curve. Let's meet them. Joining me today are Rahul Saha, whose diverse background across the aerospace and defense industry spans multiple missions and roles. A lifelong learner, he's passionate about applying impactful technologies to solve today's toughest challenges. Throughout his career, he supported and led teams across development, manufacturing, and operations, working on everything from launch systems and hypersonic aircraft to human spaceflight and space control. He serves as a board chair for BRAS, a nonprofit supporting women and girls in need. Ebenezer Dadson is a visionary AI architect and strategist working at the intersection of cutting edge technology and real world impact. His experience spans enterprise AI, defense systems, medical systems, and emerging technology platforms. He has built a reputation for turning complexity into clarity and clarity into action. Ebenezer specializes in building scalable, mission driven AI ecosystems and blending deep technical expertise with strategy and leadership. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. Thanks for having us.
So, you both have worked across so many roles, technologies, and industries. So, I'd love to ground this in your real world experience. Let's start with how technology shows up in your day to day. What's one technology trend in your field that's made the big impact on your work?
This will probably come as no surprise, and certainly no surprise to Eb, but artificial intelligence and machine learning, as that is being leveraged into the aerospace field, and particularly into space, I've seen a massive impact and a massive promise of what could come. And I'm not talking about large language models. There's a lot of ways to leverage those on the development side, perhaps, but in the decision making and critical understanding of what is going in autonomous systems, autonomous spacecraft, machine learning is starting to and will play a huge.
Yeah, I will second what Rahul said. It's AI, of course. Being in a field where your deep domain expertise is very important to the systems that we build, AI has actually allowed me to expand the breadth of my knowledge. And oftentimes when we do our work, it requires conversations with other domain experts and other stakeholders. But in this case, in addition to those conversations, I'm able to maybe prompt ChatGPT to ask about tangential things related to the work that I need to do. So when I go in to speak with my stakeholders, I'm able to ask better questions and get better insights from them that support the work that I do or the systems that we're building. So it has been tremendously impactful.
Wow, that's very, very interesting. And it's interesting that you said it helps you expand questions that you can prompt the real experts, the domain experts
Exactly.
in the field, so that it also entices additional thinking, right?
Definitely.
I'll just say that, to give like a better example or more concrete example of where it can make a huge impact. Think of how more complex our space systems are getting, our space missions are getting. Think of as we start to launch robotics into space and we need to be able to kind of do things with human dexterity, but in the environment and at the distance of space. That is where I think like the immediate impact will be. And I hope to see that actually within the next couple of years, where we start to see AI really coming into its own in space.
Wow. Yeah. And I imagine every other industry as well, in the medical field, manufacturing, developing software, and everything like that. So I think it's just something that we need to learn more about. But I'm really curious about how have you personally had to adapt to learn new skills to keep up? Some people are afraid of AI, but I'm curious about how you're adapting.
So most of my career has been spent kind of working on the edge of technology, particularly within software, starting from kind of the hardware, moving up to embedded software systems, and then the abstractions have continued to kind of move us further up the technology stack. In that respect, technology, or better yet, the software ecosystem, has always changed and grown rapidly in a lot of ways. Over the past 4 years, though, since the release of ChatGPT, the AI ecosystem, the number of tools, frameworks, and applications that are now being released, it's happening at an exponential rate. So personally, for me, a lot more of my time is spent separating the signal from the noise in most cases. I would say the social media, the influencers, etc. It puts a lot of noise out there. As I grow more senior in my career, I realize that, the benefit of your experts really is in mitigating risk, whether it's timeline risk or actual system operations risk. And so, me having to separate signal from noise in the release of technology is something that I find myself doing more in my personal life. Whereas, and it translates very well to the professional work that we do, leading junior engineers. It's important to learn the new skills, but still understand the business impact of it all. So that's definitely something that I've had to adapt at work, because I'm not used to people or junior engineers really pulling insights from their personal lives and trying to integrate it into a system. Great in some cases, but not all.
Yeah. So for me, adapting, and you kind of mentioned it, I think, in the introduction about being a lifelong learner. For me, adapting is more about evolving. So I look to kind of learn from the best. And it's not necessarily about learning like a new technology or new capability to the nth degree. There are experts in those, Eb, as you were mentioning, like being able to communicate with those experts. But I really need to and want to try to understand enough to understand if it impacts either what I'm currently doing or my current mission set. And I kind of like approach it in what I'll call like a two-step fashion, right? First is, the introduction to the technology itself. Is it something new? Is it something applicable? And I think it's important to recognize relatively quickly, especially at the pace of which innovation is happening right now, whether there's an impact to be had, at least in the near term, and kind of filter, as you said, the signal from the noise. There's going to be a lot of noise out there as people try new things. So what are the new things that actually can impact what I'm doing today, what I'm doing right now? And then it's important to also understand that just because a technology is amazing and great doesn't mean you should jam it into your solution, right? There are traditional solutions to things that maybe have more life in them. And we don't, as an example, have to use AI to solve every problem. It certainly helps in many cases. And I'm lucky to have folks that keep me grounded when I get excited about a new technology. They say, just because it's new doesn't mean it's better. Here's how we're doing it right now. Is it actually doing it better? And so I always try to look for that. The other thing I'll say, you talked about adapting and learning new skills. The adapting side of things, it's not always about technology, right? I am a part of a massive kind of ecosystem of professionals. I don't know all of their jobs. Sometimes adapting is a better appreciation of what everyone around me is doing, understanding parts of the business that I'm not involved in, maybe less technical, maybe a little more management. I did a foray into management and have since returned to technical. And it's important to understand that. And that's part of adapting, to be able to bring a more holistic point of view and solutions to those that I'm serving or my customers.
Absolutely. I really like that. Adapting is not just about the technology, but also the ecosystem that you're working with. And that includes the people, right? The teammates,
Absolutely. Yeah.
understanding what they bring to the table and what makes them tick, so to speak, right? And so that you can maybe harvest essential skills that they may have that you can apply to to the problem space that you're trying to solve. And so now I'm curious, did learning, these types of technologies feel intimidating at first?
Absolutely. It can be intimidating. I learned, I would say maybe 10, 15 years ago, started learning about guidance and navigation at the true level of like not maybe doing the math, but like more viscerally understanding how that sort of works on our spacecraft. It is incredibly intimidating. It's intimidating for the math itself, which funnily enough, I'm not that fond of math for being an engineer, but it's intimidating math and looking at the equations and understanding that. And so for me, in order to better kind of understand those sorts of things, I have to humanize it. So it's the people that were important to me in learning. Who was I learning from? How did they describe what they were doing? How did I interpret what they were doing into my own kind of experiences and couch it that way so I could better understand? And so it absolutely can be intimidating. But I think it's important to recognize that just because it's intimidating doesn't mean that you can't understand it. You'll understand it perhaps in a different way. And also that it's okay for it to be intimidating for you as long as you have someone you trust who really does understand the issue, and that's someone you can go to and work with.
What motivated you to dive into specific areas, even though it felt intimidating?
I honestly, I have a love for technology ever since I was a kid. Just always asking, "Oh, how does this work?" I swear I used to annoy my parents all the time because nothing was ever really just surface level. And so I do truly believe I have a love for learning, and that really is my motivation. Just in understanding how things work, understanding people in general. We're all very different in understanding how different people approach different things. And an extension of that is how engineers develop different solutions. And so these products that we get access to, these technologies, they're really just an instantiation of how someone approaches a problem. And that's fascinating to me.
Amazing. I really like that because as we work in teams, right, everyone brings their own skill set, their own set of ideas that are formed based on our own experiences. And that diversity helps us
Yeah.
to bring forward the best possible solution for that problem space. But staying relevant also requires constant learning, like we have been talking about. So let's talk about how you approach that. Do you have a system for keeping your skills up to date, like, taking online courses or certifications or any other way? How do you go about learning and deep diving into topics that you like about?
So I mostly learn, I think, through, as I said, through people. So for me, that means not online, not necessarily reading. So it's like really conferences and other forums where I can humanize what's being told to me. I can follow up, especially for me, a conversation back and forth is a much more reinforcing way for me to learn than just kind of one way. So I look for experts in emerging capabilities. If there's something I'm interested in, I'll look for the experts in that, and then I'll listen. And it's more about, I think, just continually doing that. Again, for right now, autonomy AI is huge. So much to learn there. So many experts in it, both internal to where I work and my organization, but also externally, and just putting myself out there for months and years it really takes to really start to appreciate some of these things, and just constantly looking for those opportunities to engage is how I kind of keep my skills, I would say, up to date or refreshed, as it were.
So I doom scroll a lot. But on a more serious note, so I as I've mentioned before, there's a lot of influencers out there posturing themselves as experts, whether it be on LinkedIn or Twitter, etc. Ironically, I follow a lot of them, particularly to filter through the noise. And you can't filter through the noise if you don't know what the noise is. As much as a lot of their posts and reviews are fueled by engagement, for better or for worse, that drives where the community goes. And the reality is the community is a lot more than just the senior most influence, less experienced engineers, mid-level senior engineers that also have influence and guide the community. I definitely do balance that with the influencers, individuals like Jan LeCun, Andre Kaparthi, Andrew Ng. Though those are kind of the foremost experts in the field. Jan, working formerly at Meta as their chief AI scientist, Andrew Ng at Stanford. So I definitely follow them as well. So oftentimes what I do is I try to balance just the noise with the signals that I get from those experts in the field, and then extract by balancing those influencers and domain experts. Ultimately, my ultimate side project is Oris AI, which is the medical technology company that I co-founded. And so a lot of the work that I do implementation wise is for that side project. But in addition to that, though, there's a lot of things, tools, etc., that come out. Hands-on exploration of those in my free time are definitely a path that I take often. I will kind of shout out to O'Reilly's media platform. A lot of the experts out in the AI field, they've done a great job publishing great material on O'Reilly. And so I do have a membership with that platform, and it's been tremendously helpful for me.
That's great. Rahul, I love the way you said you like to humanize the learning, and
Yeah.
I think that's very important too because some people are visual learners, right? Other people can read a lot and get the content that they need to get right away. But having the conversations, I think, in human, I love the way that you said humanize it because having those conversations, just like we're having right now, kind of expands our curiosity right beyond the books, beyond
Yeah.
the content that we may read.
Mhm.
So, and I also like the doom scrolling as well, right? Because that's another mode of learning. But it's very important to separate or filter that noise from the real thing, right? The
hmm
impactful that you can take that content and then expand it or learn more about or discuss with your friends or colleagues. So I really like that input. But I think it can feel overwhelming to decide which training or which platform to join or certification to invest in. How do you decide which skills are worth investing in time in? How do you guys do that? How do you go about that?
From my point of view, I think it's a relatively unfortunate, well, maybe not unfortunate, but like I'll make a quick decision on whether or not I want to dive deeper in. As I said, I'd mentioned I think about making quick assessments. And so, but what I look for are technologies or capabilities that are differentiating from what, the current state is of whatever I'm working on, right? So, but it can't just be better, right? Like building a better widget while maybe kind of valid in and of itself, right? I'm really looking for kind of what is the mission use case that it's driving. And sometimes it's not just like, okay, great, you have 3 dB more, but what does 3 dB give you? So you have to look that one step beyond. Is the technology actually better? Is it having meaningful impact? And meaningful impact can mean, of course, the mission or what you're trying to achieve in our society. It can also mean, can you do something cheaper? Can you do something faster? Right. So there, meaningful impact can be business impact as well. And those are the two kind of areas I focus on to decide and to assess whether I want to pursue a technology further for incorporation into what I'm doing, or if it's something that great, I now know that, I now understand it. Let me put it on the shelf and see, revisit it at a later time to see if it has more meaning and impact.
So, as I mentioned, doom scrolling, I do that quite a bit. However, that's not very efficient in identifying what is worth your time. I often stick to kind of the fundamentals, the architectures, and the various frameworks that exist across the AI technology stack. Particularly with AI, I'd say a lot of times we're inundated with the model releases. Um, have it's interesting. I haven't seen a release version get so much hype and attention, especially within the software ecosystem, as much as the AI models have gotten, particularly because fundamentally they're often the same architecture. And so, ironically, so that's less of a concern to me. I do focus more on the core architectural changes, and the technology products that are being released versus some incremental change in MMLU as a parameter. If you look at these models, often you're talking 1, 2%, 3% maybe. That's I'd say that's PhD level differentiation. It matters. However, is it fundamentally going to matter to the business and the system that we're building in order to meet those business solutions? And oftentimes it doesn't. And so I really try to think about what are the fundamental changes in architectures, et cetera, that can drive new value versus drive more hype, let's say.
Right. Or the next shiny object, right?
Exactly.
Right. So I'm curious about how have you learned something that didn't immediately seem useful, but later became critical?
I'll say all learning is useful, at least in my mind. So
That's a
I
good
always try to
point.
go into that. If it's not useful right now, like I said, I'll
Mhm.
I'll park it in the back of my mind, but I don't see an advantage to lack of knowledge, right? So
Right.
as much knowledge as I can absorb, whatever the subject, right? I'm going to absorb it mostly enthusiastically. Some things might bore me, but I'll still try to absorb it, because even if something bores me, doesn't mean it doesn't have value or couldn't bring value. So I do actually try to incorporate, like, a breadth of knowledge into problem solving. I think problem solving is about creativity, not just math and science, and orthogonal capabilities and understanding to your scientific and mathematical knowledge, I think, are important to bringing those solutions. So I've never really looked at anything. I couldn't think back to something I learned and said and had an aha moment much later. I think it just kind of got incorporated into the way I solve problems, and it's just continuously.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you, Rahul. Oftentimes, most things are worth taking note of, right? What they say, fun fact, right? It's a fact, you know it. It seems trivial, but oftentimes it drives the way you make different connections
Mhm.
in your thought process. I will say, though, the one thing that I learned early on, particularly with generative AI, is RAG. So that stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. It's it's really a technique of being able to being able to ground your large language models in a context that's relevant to you. It's interesting because initially the promise of large language models, from my perspective, was the generalization of the models due to the scale of those models, the tremendous amount of data that went into developing large language models, and still does. There's and we start talking about AGI and super intelligence, and really it's about the idea that a single model could handle tasks or expertise across general domains in the way we do as human beings. But we're not quite there yet. And RAG just felt like this temporary, almost jerry rigged solution to get there. It's like, oh, well, we're not there, but we're going to make this work just to show capability because we got to ride this hype train, you know?
Mhm.
Having been involved in AI from when we were more so looking at classical machine learning, particularly ahead of generative AI and things like ChatGPT, the model was really the focus there, right? Transfer learning specifically, we now call that fine tuning for generative AI, but transfer learning was always the focal point of achieving task specific performance. It requires significant expertise. But in generative AI, looking at transformers, we took RAG and kind of jerry rigged it so that we didn't have to do the transfer learning up front. And now RAG is a core building block of any AI system, which is ironic. So yeah, I learned it. I had to look into it because the industry was talking about it. There was a ton of noise, still is. Um, but yeah, I did not expect it to stay as a critical component in the broader generative AI system or ecosystem. So that's interesting. So sorry to everybody I told that they shouldn't worry too much about RAG, because here we are.
Right. Yeah. No, I find that interesting. And I agree that, all learning is useful, right? Because you learn and you can pivot based
Hmm.
on what you learn. Actually, and you also mentioned that it helps you make connections to other things that we hadn't thought about, maybe, or to other processes that you hadn't thought about, making the connection. So I think I agree with you both that learning, all learning is useful. You can't really discount it, whether it's a new connection or just make a better decision. So it helps you do that. And we talk about change, and change is hard for everybody. But I'm curious, how do you stay open to change when technology is shifting so quickly?
Yeah. That's I've been thinking about that a lot, actually, because AI is a revolution right now, so it's changing a lot of things very quickly. And so, in reflecting on that, the first thing I'd say is you have to stay humble, right? You might have accomplished something great. You should rightly be proud of it, but it could very well be eclipsed in the next, day, week, month, year. And so, as you said, change happens quick, and it doesn't mean that what you didn't have value, right? It's just that someone has has figured out something with greater value. And when I see that happening, I try to embrace that change and understand what is it that they've done. Why is it either more compelling, or why is it, by the numbers better? I also know, and this helps, right, that I can still continue to provide perspective and understanding, because I did solve maybe a problem, and so I can bring that perspective, incorporate it, or kind of use it with whatever else is emerging, what is new, and then maybe you can then kind of bring about like being part of that change as well, and being an agent within that change, and you're not an outsider to it. It's not eclipsing you. You're just evolving with it. Keep that perspective, and that is again one of the reasons why, like, I've been embracing machine learning for some of the things that we're doing. Is I had some pretty great success with my team, really, not myself, in some areas in like spacecraft navigation, and AI is going to revolutionize that, and that's one of the reasons why I just dove right in. I said, let's make this happen. I have perspective, I have understanding of what we have done. Let's make sure we don't commit the same mistakes. But let me figure out this new thing along with the experts that are doing it, and become a part of that as well.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I like to think of myself as an open-minded person, especially when it comes to technology. I'm the guy who, I'll hear about a new thing, and I'll always want to try the different products, even if I already like what I already have. Ironically, one of the things I like to do is just to when my wife hates going to any kind of store with me, because I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I'm just walking around just looking like, oh, I wonder what they have now. I wonder how the home department at Target has changed since we were last here, right? Are there different products, right? Because we're being sold. I mean, the reality is the marketing paradigm, there's only so much space. They choose what we're exposed to. And so seeing what Target exposes us to versus what Costco exposes us to, and more so bringing it back to the technology, what NVIDIA is going to talk about versus what AMD or Intel wants to talk about, or Meta versus Google, right? And at the end of the day, they all have their space that they take up in the industry or in the market, and they're going to expose you to what benefits them. And so for me, oftentimes it's just like window shopping, to be honest. And sometimes I just explore what they have, or I'll look at different YouTube videos of people who do reviews. But for me, often it's a continuous validation that past decisions are still good decisions, and kind of checking to make sure that I'm not too reliant on what I have done. It's funny, and I'm going to quote it, and some people are going to laugh, but it's actually a quote from Drake. And Drake he ended up getting sponsored by Nike. And he said, Nike pays me because I did it, but they're not paying me because I did it. They're paying me to do it again. And I think it's interesting because the solutions that we've solved as our careers continue to grow, we did that. But the reality is we continue to be compensated for what we will do in the future. And so making sure I'm checking my mindset to make sure that I'm still thinking about what is possible rather than what has been done. And so that's kind of how I make sure. Sometimes it's unconscious, but sometimes it's just it's a conscious, well, I haven't done this in a while. Let me take a look.
I love that. I mean, you both mentioned open mind, evolution, perspective, right? Gain perspective. And I couldn't agree with you more about that quote, because we are here today trying to solve the problems that our customers are having, right? We solved customer problems before. Those lessons learned will help us solve and innovate more in the future. And we can't really just sit back and say, well, I already solved that problem,
Right.
right? So I really love that perspective and input from both of you. And another key factor, it's really staying connected to the trends and thought leaders. And you both have mentioned this already, but want to go a little bit deeper. How do you stay informed about emerging technologies in the fields that you are both in? You both mentioned conferences and publications and things
Mhm.
like that, but can you elaborate on that a little more?
So from a conference point of view, right, looking for those broad conferences where a lot of information across a breadth will be presented. So maybe not a technology focus, but one that's more like, one that comes to mind is the small sat conference that's held every year. If you think about it, just saying small satellite and leaving it at that, well, there's mission sets across the boards, there's technologies across the board, right? It's a one-stop shop to just kind of see everything that's going on in the community. So I like conferences like that for just kind of learning more about what's out there. On the publication side, for me, it's what I'll call popular scientific articles. So and why popular ones versus, peer-reviewed journals is, I recognize I'm not an expert in everything. And while there's always an abstract or something up front in a technical peer-reviewed journal article that is describing what's going on, they are really describing it to their community. And so I like to look for those articles that are trying to describe innovation and technology outside of a specific community and more towards kind of the general public, because it's more approachable at first, right? And it can help me understand, is this something I do want to dig in more to? Is this something I do want to then go to the experts? I also look for surprises. And this gets to something I mentioned earlier about orthogonal capability, right? If I find an article surprising or some information surprising, I really want to ask myself, well, why is it surprising? What surprised me about it? And see if somewhere in that surprise is something I hadn't been thinking of. And so, I will be reading things that, have nothing to do with my field, right? And I'm talking about as far reaching as archaeology or kind of other aspects of things that you consider more humanities, maybe again at the popular level, right? Not at the peer reviewed level, just because it's more approachable and easier to digest.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with the conferences. It's interesting oftentimes within the industry looking at kind of domain specific conferences and then also looking at the technology conferences as well. One that I went to recently, CVPR last year, it was in Nashville, Tennessee. That one, tons of things to learn there, very much in the research emerging technologies domain. But one thing I really liked about it is a lot of the talks and sessions were focused around domains and that domain applications. I think that's very powerful. So that's one way I get exposed to emerging technologies, because a technology in itself does not have to be emerging, right? I wasn't in the field at the time, but as I hear mentors and advocates speak about kind of the internet age and what it was like when we were building those networks in the defense industry, well, it was a technology that was emerging, but it was truly just a technology. Now, I think the emerging component is really about the application of that technology in some industry, some field, or this impact on a community. And so I really try to balance that with places like Archive or the IEEE technology page, which I'm lucky to have a subscription for. And so, those are kind of the type of things that I like to focus on. I will say, Archive being an open source platform, the quality of papers have been going down over the past couple of years, specifically AI generated content. Those who are seeking engagement through Archive, which not the platform in my opinion, but yeah, how things drive communities, looking at the various communities, the industries. I think that's really how I figure out what's emerging. And sometimes what's emerging in healthcare, for instance, is not yet emerging in defense. And that's a place where you can make an impact. And so to drive technologies that could then be emerging in other industries due to the connection that you're able to make.
Yeah, I think the conferences, right, is not only the presentations, but the connections that you can make there for future,
Exactly.
future content, future discussions, future exchanges of ideas and things like that. You also mentioned reading the articles for different communities so that you get a different perspective and can apply that to your own solution space and ask more questions, right? Ask more questions about that thing that surprised you, Rahul. You mentioned what surprises you that you can ask a little more about
Mhm.
and how that may apply to your specific area of expertise or domain. So those are great input. So let's do a rapid round of advice for listeners trying to stay relevant. So I'm going to ask you two questions. What you can tell me what's one skill every STEM professional should be thinking about today?
For me, it's communication. Absolutely. If you can't convey your ideas, they're going to remain your own and can't benefit anyone else. So doesn't matter how good you are at math, science, STEM, become a communicator. Practice that every day.
Yeah, I actually really, really love that. I think that is absolutely a fundamental skill. I think what I would say is taking that a little bit further, being a translator. How do you leverage your discipline as a tool? How will you leverage your discipline to impact your industry, right? How can you translate just that, your expertise into an industry, into a community, or otherwise? And so yeah, I absolutely love it. Communication and being that technology translator, because I think that that's one thing that is uniquely human, is how we're able to thread across so many different areas of intelligence. And it's I think we're still a ways out.
Yeah, yeah, I love those. I love those. Okay, here's the second one. One mindset tip for keeping pace with change.
For me, it's there will always be something new coming. So disrupt yourself rather than being disrupted by something else or someone else. Be the change. Never be stagnant.
Love it.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in the same boat with you. I really let what you know be a catalyst for what you do. And I think what I really truly mean there is we all go through our experiences and learn things, but let that be a catalyst of what you do next rather than just relying on what is already known. I think that can really help the continuous growth mindset. I think out of that, two things that are key is the catalyst, right? Allow that to continue to drive you, and then make sure it's progress towards what's next. The world, we talk about it, change is the constant. And so understanding how to adapt to that change, I think, is key.
Absolutely. I love that. I love it. Rahul and Ebenezer, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Thank
Pleasure.
you very much for having us, Gabby.
Staying relevant in STEM or any career isn't just about mastering the latest tools. It's about being adaptable, curious, and intentional about learning. To our listeners, take one small step this week. Whether it's reading an article, experimenting with a new tool, or connecting with a mentor to keep your skills sharp and your career future-proof. Thanks for listening to Keys to the Future. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep unlocking your future.
Thanks to my guests, Ebenezer Dadson and Rahul Saha. Thanks to Roger Coe for quality reviews. And thanks to Jill always.